Hello, everyone, and welcome to our series of meeting the 5 New York City Chief Actuaries. So in the countdown to our 105th anniversary, we're introducing and letting everybody know a little bit more about the history of our office and the 5 Chief Actuaries that have served New York City. So with us today, we have Jonathan Schwartz. Jonathan serves the City of New York as Chief Actuary from 1974 to 1986. And we're going to be asking him a little bit about his time spent with the city at that time. So thank you for being with us, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a quick question. So how many mayors did you work for and who were they?
Okay, well, first, just to qualify a little bit, before being chief actuary, I was acting chief. And before being acting chief, I was assistant chief. So if you want to start from my tenure as assistant chief, I served under Mayor Lindsay, Mayor Beam, and Mayor Koch, and then not to specify the time frame. So I was assistant chief between May 3rd of 67 and some date early in June of 73. I was acting chief between whatever that date in June of 73 was through June 30th of 74. And I was chief between July 1st of 74 and July 15th of 86. And essentially, I spanned, 2 years and 8 months of Lindsay's first term, all of Lindsay's second term, all of Bean's only term, all of Koch's first term, all of Koch's second term, and then about 6.5 months of Koch's third term.
So that was definitely before term limits.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, when we're talking about a third term.
Because Koch did try to run for a fourth term, but Dinkins beat him in the primary.
Yeah. And we've talked before, obviously, and you and I have a lot of similarities with our time at the OA. And one of the things is you were obviously chief actuary during a financial crisis.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
No,
here we are in 2020 through 2021, dealing with our own issues in the city right now. So one of many. Another similarity we discovered was you started being chief actuary for the New York City at the age of 36. And I also started at the age of 36. So many coincidences. So tell us about, your time as the chief actuary, what.
Okay, well, it's interesting. So I take over on July 1st of 74. And the first several months are pretty ordinary. You're just doing the same stuff I was doing first as Jesse's assistant, and then as acting chief, and then nothing jumped out. And then sometime the early part of 75, all the wheels come off. And, one of the interesting features was this. The Office of the Actuary, right before we started laying people off, had 48 people. Exactly 2 years later, we had 24 people. I remember making the following kind of, elaborate actuarial projection and saying that at this rate, we're going to keep losing a person a month. And with the 24th month, at the end of that month, I will walk out, turn off the lights, and that will be the end of the Office of the Actuary. But fortunately, the things didn't play out like that.
It did not trend that way, hopefully, luckily.
Yeah. But it's just in general, I think the two things which I think I'd like to be remembered are, number one, that I contributed to helping us navigate what you would now call fiscal crisis 1. And number two, that I got the Office of the Actuary started toward automation. I mean, at the time I became chief, and all during my time as assistant chief and acting chief, valuations were being done exactly the same way that George Buck did them. You had all these clerks pounding away in their calculators and entering things in these huge worksheets. And, I helped get us started on the road to automation.
Yeah. And so so during Frisco crisis number 2, I would say then, we've been fortunate to date that we have not had to lay anybody off. That's a really good thing, other than the managerial furloughs that we just finished up. But so I can't imagine having half the office disappear and having to say goodbye to half the office. So, but yeah, you definitely set the office on, this trend to automate. And in my tenure, so far, that's another thing we have in common, because that's been something that I've been focusing on, to try to automate a little bit more and bringing some of the work in-house. So, and kind of on that theme of your time in the office, when you think back to that time, is there a particular scene in your head that you think of, or a day that you think of, or describe a normal day there maybe?
As a matter of fact, I think this is a cute story. So, my 2 daughters were born in May of 79 and October of 82. And my wife, who had been both a programmer and a systems engineer with IBM, basically left the workplace right before the older daughter was born. And in those days, you didn't get these long maternity leaves like women do nowadays. I mean, she was given, I think, like 6 weeks from the time that our older daughter was born, that she had to either, come back to work or resign. And she wasn't ready to go back to work, so she resigned. And I guess there is one interesting something of all this. I had worked for a consulting firm for a number of years before going down to Washington to do my draft dodging. I guess I can elaborate on that a little bit. Essentially, my military service consisted of getting commissioned in the public health service and then writing Fortran programs at the National Institute of Health for 2 years. At the end of those 2 years, I never wore a uniform, I never did basic training, but I had the status of a discharged veteran, which was, I thought it was interesting, and I felt very fortunate to have stumbled on this. But anyway, so back to the story with my wife and my daughters. So my wife goes back to work sometime in 1976, and then December of 76, when both the daughters are home, for a whole week, she says to me, "You must take the girls into the office someday this week." All right. No, I got my orders.
And this was before Take Your Daughters to Work Day.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes. But I had my instructions from the boss, and I brought them in. And that particular day, I had a pre-existing appointment with this very prominent labor consultant, Jack Beagle, whose office was across the street from Port Authority, and whom I used to visit frequently on my way into the office, on my way out of the office. And so anyway, I bring my daughters in, and we start by going to Jack's office, and all of Jack's secretaries were very happy to take care of 2 cute little girls. And then after we finish our business, I go and get the car, which I parked in a garage where Jack had an account, and Jack paid for my parking. And then I bring the daughters down to the office of the actuary on Worthing Church Streets, and they hang out in my office for most of the day. And lunchtime, we just send out and bring in a pizza, and we eat that in the office for lunch. And the day we get home, and my wife Vivian turns to my older daughter Rachel and says, "So, what does Daddy do in the office?" And my daughter Rachel, who at the time was about 7.5, says, "Well, Daddy goes to meetings and talks on the telephone." And I thought that was a reasonably good description of what the job was like, actually.
You know what? In 2020, I think that's what I still do. Except it's virtual now, the meetings.
Yeah. So
that's a good description. That's a nice memory from the days.
Yeah. Yep.
So, being 83 years young, right? And having a birthday very close to Einstein's, but the day after. you are the chief actuary with the longest tenure in retirement, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't know if other folks know, but George Buck, after he retired from the Office of the Actuary, he went and continued his work with his consulting firm that he started. And Jesse Felds, unfortunately, died in active service. He wasn't in the office when he passed away, but he was serving as chief actuary when he passed away. So you've had the luxury of celebrating many years in retirement. So tell us a little bit about your time in retirement and how you've spent it.
Well, essentially, once I stopped being chief actuary, a number of unions fairly shortly thereafter started reaching out to me saying, would you like to do some consulting for us? And then on top of that, a consulting firm in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which was not far from Teaneck, which is where I was living at the time, who were consultants to the Patrolmen's Bedroom Association, the PBA, had gotten an assignment from the PBA that they didn't know how to do. So they called me and said, "Hey, can you come help us out with this assignment?" And one thing led to another, and I became a member of the consulting firm.
Mm-hmm.
So for a number of years, it's funny, I was with the consulting firm for almost 10 years, like 9.5 years. And during that time, it got sold twice, but it was still, working with the same people. And what persuaded me to go out on my own, I mean, I had originally said, I don't want to be the person that has to worry about whether or not there's paper in the fax machine. But essentially what happened was this. With the original consulting firm in its original incarnation, we had a deal as to how much of my revenues I got to keep. When the firm was sold for the first time, they changed the formula, but it was close enough so that it wasn't worth getting excited about. And I said, okay, fine. When it got sold the second time, though, they did major surgery on what I was allowed to keep.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was essentially, the second formula was that the salary was $100,000 plus 1/8 of everything I brought in. They took away the 1/8, which meant all of a sudden I was getting a cut of $25,000 a year. And I said, you know what? This kind of money, I'll worry about the paper and the fax machine. So I went out. I started, Jonathan Schwartz Consulting Actuary on July 1st of '96, and I guess to this day I'm still Jonathan Schwartz Consulting Actuary, even though for the last couple of years it's been very, very sporadic, part-time, whatever, however else you want to describe it. But for a lot of years, though, it was good. It was interesting. I mean, put it this way: if I am part of the last generation of pension actuaries, I feel very fortunate to have been part of it.
Yeah. And during those 10 years of working both in the consulting firm and your own, you've had a wealth of clients, a lot of unions.
Oh yeah, that's it. With one exception, and one of my two remaining clients is a small law firm. One of the partners in the law firm used to be, what the hell was he? I'm forgetting. One of the problems of dealing with an 83-year-old. I have no problem remembering stuff, what in the world was Stan Lupkin? I just don't remember. It was a high level, legal position, but I don't remember precisely what it was.
You can fill us in later.
Yeah. Jesus. I can always call it. Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay. Anyway, yes. So, but the point is that there's this law firm where I know one of the partners, and when they started their own pension program, I was the only actuary that any of the partners knew. Mm-hmm. So they asked me, would I be willing to be their pension consultant? No, I never turn clients away, So now that I'm down to just two clients, they're one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been a pension consultant for a lot of years, but
it definitely sounds very interesting. And I know that also in your retirement, that you still go to the same barber, or I should say before the pandemic, you still went to the same barber.
Yeah.
And there's a ritual of when you get your haircut and what you do, right?
Oh, absolutely. No, let's put it this way. Um, for some time now, even going back to when Bob North was around, the ritual was I would go get the haircut and then have lunch with whomever from the office of the actuary I could scare up. Now, for the longest while, that was Bob and only Bob. When I went to Bob's retirement party sometime in the fall of 2014, I was the first time I met Mike Samet. And Mike, out of the blue, says to me, "Hey, I know you used to have lunch with Bob all the time. I'd like to have lunch with me." And I said, "Sure, why not?" And so the practice of lunch with someone from the office of the actuary continued. And then, of course, when you joined, you very timidly asked, would it be okay if you were to be included with us? And we said, "Sure, why not?" And then ultimately we broadened it to include Marlene also. But
yeah, so you're on a 6-week schedule of cutting your hair.
pretty much.
Every 6 weeks we would have this tradition of getting together for lunch, but of course now it's virtual. We just
Like I said, March 3rd of 2020 was the last time we did this.
Yeah. And do you want to share with everybody here what your favorite lunch item is that y'all
It got to the point where we walk in. This is the Gee Whiz diner, which at the moment is defunct, but we have reason to hope that it may reopen at some point in the not too distant future. I would walk in there and they say salmon burger, right?
With extra tartar sauce, of course. Right?
Absolutely, salmon burger with a lot of extra tartar sauce.
Yeah. So, again, reflecting back on your time as chief actuary, now that you've retired, what is something that you want to be remembered for, and what's your legacy that you want to be?
Okay, pretty much the two things I said before. That number one, I helped, doing what had to be done during the fiscal crisis. I don't think I single-handedly, dispelled the fiscal crisis, but I was able to lend some assistance. And number two, the fact that at the time I took over, the office was completely unautomated. We were doing evaluations the exact same way that George Buck did it. This whole army of clerks pounding away on their calculating machines and entering figures in these very long these enormous worksheets. And I got us started toward automating the process.
Yeah. So that's good. I mean, you definitely laid the groundwork for us to take it to the next level. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Kind of looking ahead a little bit, to folks that might want to be a chief actuary in the future, or to, the New York City's future chief actuaries. What kind of advice do you have for them?
The advice I would have is, don't necessarily think that you have to get to the top immediately. Like, for example, I don't think it would be a bad idea at all for a person who's harboring ambitions to be the chief actuary of the city to try to obtain some kind of subordinate position in the office of the actuary so that you can get to learn what the job is all about without having to be subject to all the pressures that are always visited upon the chief actuary.
Which was your path, right? Because you were.
That was my path. Yes. At the age of 29, I was recruited by a man age 59 to be his assistant. I thought that was great. I mean,
that's kind of the advice that I share sometimes too, where when you have something that seems so daunting and such a big goal, you kind of you could easily be discouraged by thinking like, oh my gosh, I have this big task that I have to accomplish. The thing that I always tell myself is, one step at a time. And that's very similar to the advice that you're sharing.
Yeah, you don't have to swallow the whole thing in one gulp, take a mouthful, and
definitely. So Jonathan, thank you. When we celebrated our centennial 5 years ago, you were, part of it in person. Thank you for being a part of that. And it's wonderful to have you to be part of the 105th anniversary celebration too. So thank you for your time.
Oh, this has been a pleasure. This has truly been a pleasure.